city continues to try to be very reactive instead of proactive. They were not out in front of this thing. And so now they're making rules every day and changing. There's a lot of risk involved in these things. And so we try to stay in front of it. But that being said, here is what I would project. Here are the numbers that I feel is reasonable, knowing that there are 15 to 20 to 25% management fees if you're going to have it properly managed and all those things. But you got people, outside investors, who kind of see the numbers and see the, I guess I always look at the 1% rule, which doesn't really exist anymore, but there's a lot of people chasing that 1% rule. And this city gets you a lot closer to that than a lot of other cities in the United States right now. And so that's the conversation we have, is set the expectation that, this isn't pixie dust and there's not going to be, whatever, twice the return on your investment in a long-term rental. But if you do it right and you get the right location in the right area, these things can pay off. And we start the process from there.
Love that. Alan, what would you add?
Let me ask Mark a question. Mark, do you know a single bank? Because I don't know a bank that's doing this right now. Do you know a single bank that's giving loans for short-term rentals based on short-term rental income only?
Zero. They don't want to. And on that point, most people, when you present a rental property, they don't want to hear the word short-term rental. They're going to appraise it as the asset and a long-term investment, or as a long-term rental. And saying short-term will sometimes squash a lot of deals.
Totally. Yeah. Totally agree with that. And I've had experience lately. I bought a short-term rental down in Florida a few months ago. And back then I bought it in February, right before COVID hit. And back then you could buy a property with only using short-term rental income as the basis for what you're doing. And when COVID hit, that changed completely. So, one of the questions you asked, Marcus, is how do you assess the value of it? Honestly, you cannot assess the value of a short-term rental as being higher than what the regular market shows. So if it shows that it comps at a certain value, then it still has to appraise. You still have to be able to qualify for financing, which is interesting. And so what that did, in my opinion, is it brought the prices of short-term rentals down, because I felt like they were inflated a little bit back before February. Now they're down a little bit, thankfully, and it's more affordable to buy one. Now, in my experience over COVID, the market is hurt by it. Nashville is hurt more than other cities from what I see. Now, Nashville's hurt, and everybody that I've talked to, all my clients that have short-term rentals that are still using them as short-term rentals, they're saying that they're getting about 60% of the amount of rent they normally got for other years. And I think the reason that Nashville's been hurt, and this is coming from me and other Airbnb management companies, they say that because Nashville's so event-driven, there's no concerts, there's no conferences, there's no festivals, there's no music happening in the city. That Airbnb business is down in Nashville. You compare that to the beach, it wasn't hit. People still vacationed at the beach. They don't care if there's not a concert there. They're still going to the beach like crazy. And right. So I've seen that market actually has increased in value. And I also follow the one in Gatlinburg, Pigeon Forge, and that value has gone up tremendously.
Yeah.
Me and several members of my team have gone over to Pigeon Forge multiple times this year just to get familiar with that market and that short-term rental market. And what's interesting there, we went and looked at a cabin, one we almost bought back in February for $580,000. That same cabin is now $699 in Pigeon Forge.
And that's a pretty good year.
It's a great year. Yeah, the values of short-term rentals in Pigeon Forge have gone up tremendously. I mean, they've gone up, what is that, a 20% markup in less than a year? And the same is true at the beach. I mean, we're seeing people selling for 20% more than what they were selling for a year ago, which is great. And I think a lot of that has to do with people are still going on vacations, but they can't go international. They can't go as far. They can't take a cruise. They can't do other things. So those two markets have really been increased. The opposite, the values there have increased as opposed to Nashville's market, which I think has been hurt a little bit by this. Yeah, you asked a lot of questions, Marcus. I could go into other questions, but
wait, yeah, we're getting there. We're getting there. Hold
staying
back, Alan. Hold back.
for now. So anyway,
well, I love the assessment, and I love it's common sense thinking, and yet, if we get inundated with the loom, or right, or the would you call it, Martin, pixie dust of STRs, we may lose that common sense element of the investing, where Nashville is heavily event-based tourism, right? Broadway's only so cool, except if you're a native, and then you don't go to Broadway. However, it's only so cool, right? So when that comes back, hopefully that means we get to see some price increases and some sustainability there. That being said, when it comes to, and you mentioned two cities that one of my investors, they use airdna.com, I believe is what it's called. And I think you tell me, guys, if I'm incorrect, I think you can buy certain zip codes or something to assess how the businesses are doing, how the STRs are doing. Do y'all ever do that?
Yeah, AirDNA is a great resource. And you can actually just plug in an address, plug in bedrooms and location, and it'll spit out sort of a broad comparison of what the market's doing for that size and location of a house. It's very good resource for sure. And, like any other tool like that, you just gotta take it with a grain of salt. It's not exact. And I think, kind of piggybacking on what Alan said, when you talk to investors about the ups and downs of this market and how cyclical it can be in Nashville, like this is a down time. When you're looking at a normal year, December, January, February are always a little slow. You have to have that conversation up front about, listen, if this long-term cash flow number doesn't work for your investment off the top, then I would not move forward as an investment as a whole because of the city of Nashville. And I don't have experience in other markets, so that's all I can speak on. But I would highly recommend analyzing all of those things, all those data points, and making sure that you're comfortable with that. And, like you said, Marcus, a lot of investors coming from kind of different places see those numbers and get really excited because you can't get that on the East Coast. You can't get that on the West Coast. And it's very attractive.
I would agree. I also think that I've used different management companies too when it comes to this, and they do a great job of they'll use a lot of different resources to show what the market rent should be per night, that kind of thing. I would even say that I've been very underwhelmed with most management companies. I just don't think they're that impressive. If anybody has great experience, let me know. I do think that one company that we have not used yet, but we probably will, is Evolve out of Colorado. Evolve is it's a new approach to property management, and they're another good resource. They charge 10% as opposed to most of them that charge anywhere from 16 to 25 to up to 40% for a management fee for a short-term rental. And with that 10%, they're a little more hands-off, meaning that they don't have anybody in person in the city that you're doing your Airbnb, but they partner with somebody in that local area that's a cleaning service type of company that'll actually be there to go see the unit. And Evolve does a good job for what they get paid, and I think they're more reasonable in what they get paid. So I think that's one company that I would recommend strongly. What we found, we first heard about them in Pigeon Forge because a lot of the big companies there, Dollywood, they have their own management company. They charge 40%. A lot of the other ones are 25 or 30%, and it was really eating away your margin. And so Evolve being 10%, being this more of a flat fee management company, no contract involved with them, so you don't have to, you could cancel at any time, and they kind of act like they're an ally of you and work with you to help manage your property, which I like. I agree with Mark on the points of, Nashville may not hit the 1% rule, but it's really close. And if you look at other parts of the country, you're not even getting anywhere near that. And I think that Nashville's still a really great, healthy market to invest in. And I don't know, I've got a lot of opinions about the different markets. I think the beach is probably the worst of the three that I've researched. And Nashville would be the second best, and Pigeon Forge or Gatlinburg would be the best as far as returns go. I can actually see hitting over the 1% rule in the Pigeon Forge Gatlinburg area. And so it causes me to spend more time investing there. And so lately I've been spending a lot of time, like yesterday, I spent 2 hours calling Pigeon Forge and talking to other agents and getting experience with them and learning what I could about what they've experienced with their own investments. So, I think it's fascinating. I welcome conversation about that with anybody, anytime. So
I'll ask this just to make sure that we're not skipping any terminology steps. Alan, what is the 1% rule?
So the 1% rule is, it's a term investors use that just says, I want to get back 1% of whatever I buy every month. So meaning if I buy a $200,000 place, I need to get $2,000 a month in rent, right?
Gross or net?
That's a gross rule typically.
Okay.
It would be great if you could get net, but that's not possible. And in Nashville, it's almost impossible to hit that, especially from a long-term investment standpoint. And I always tell people too, it's like, do you want to own, it's like Monopoly. It's like, do you want to own Boardwalk Park Place, Marvin Gardens? Do you want to own those, or do you want to own Baltic Avenue? You might hit the 1% rule, but you're going to deal with some bad tenants in certain parts of, rural Tennessee. You might hit that 1% rule. But if you want to own something in the core of Nashville that is more of like a sure thing that's going to go up in value, you're not going to hit 1%. You're not. You're going to pay more for it, but you're going to get more on the upside of the resale side of things, which is great. And I always tell people, it's like, don't ever buy anything you wouldn't live in yourself. If it's scary to you to go there, don't own it. I've owned property where I was scared to go, and I realized quickly that life's too short for that, and I value being safe a little more than that. So,
I've heard bad things about Baltic Avenue. You gotta stay unless you got a hotel, and then you can make some money.
For sure.
Pasco hit 200. Give me all that money back.
Yeah, for sure.
Awesome. So, okay. So, Mark, I'm gonna go back to
being safe.
What's up?
What do you mean by being safe?
I just mean that I didn't feel safe. I mean, it's all relative, but some people feel safe in certain parts of the city, and certain people don't. I actually had property in Birmingham that was, I mean, I could tell you horror stories about property that I owned there where I was getting Section 8 checks, and I would go and check on the property, and the people had left 3 months before that, but didn't tell the city and didn't tell me. And, there were needles everywhere. It was, it was a mess. Air conditioner was gone, cabinets were gone. And I just realized I'm not in a safe part of town. I need to get out of here. And so that's what I mean by not safe.
Yeah. Okay. And Bill, I'm coming to you next. However, let me get Mark real quick. Mark, you and I had a discussion about, and I'll bring it up because Alan just brought it up. And guys, when I'm asking these kind of questions, here's the thought process when you're talking about STRs with investors or yourself. You aren't necessarily selling just a home. You're selling a business plan. Okay. So having resources at your fingertips, while you may not endorse one and one alone, having opportunities where you can say, okay, for management companies, here's X, Y, and Z, right? So Mark, you and I had a discussion about management companies, and there were a couple that had been appealing for you and had been wins for you. Can you tell us a few of those resources?
Yeah, I personally use a company called Lease Killers. They've been on the ground really early in this game in Nashville. They're a local company, and they've kind of evolved into kind of a bigger company. They must manage, a couple hundred units, maybe not that many, but I really highly recommend them. And it's a tough gig. I mean, they're anywhere from 15 to 20%, but you gotta understand what these things, most of the time, because when we talk about short-term rental, the definition of that is anything less than 30 days. And so usually what you're dealing with is a week to week or weekend to weekend in and out tenant that is constantly wondering what the code is and getting the beds changed over. And you're right, Marcus, it's a business plan. It's a business model. And even with the rule changes in Nashville where you can't rent any part of your dwelling anymore, you have to rent the whole dwelling. Now we're talking about an entire home that has to be turned over and cleaned and managed and everything. So I recommend them. I recommend Lease Killers. I could name a few more, but I don't have personal experience with that. And so I send my clients first to Lease Killers, and then if they want another company, then we go and find them with that understanding that I don't have personal experience with them. But I think it's really important. I think that, I think we can get into this, but when you look at the listings, it's just like shopping on Amazon, or it's just like, shopping on whatever on somewhere you've never been. It's all about location, and it's all about how many stars you're getting. It's all about the ratings and the people leaving comments, and people that are savvy Airbnb or VRBOers. They look for the language in the listing, and they want to see your proximity to 12 South or the Gulch or wherever walkable. And they want to see how the property management is anyway. And so you got a couple bad reviews and a couple bad ratings that significantly impacts your return. And it's sort of interesting to think that like, a couple of negative reviews will impact my bottom line, but it does. All these little things add up, and the amount of bedrooms you have makes a difference. And so I think that if you're getting into this ball game, if you're getting your clients in this ball game, sitting down and having a conversation with multiple property managers and see what's the best fit for you is highly recommended.
Did y'all just hear what happened right there? He went into bedrooms, details on the listing, this, that. It becomes cumbersome very fast, right? And it's very, very detailed. And if you're going to have a question, or if you're going to have a presentation, you're going to endorse somebody, automatically your client or your investor is going to associate you with that person. So sitting down with that management company and really getting the details of what they bring to the table and how they make it easy would be imperative as you launch into this world. Love that. Thank you for the clarity on that. Bill, what was your question, Bob?
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify for Davidson County. I just heard I heard Mark say that you can't Airbnb part of your property now if you live there, you were saying? Is that right?
So the environment of short-term rentals in Nashville has been ever changing, and they have been behind the times. They were not out in front of this thing. And so they now are trying to catch up. And by catching up, they're putting in rules in place that are kind of, you can't short-term rent one side of an HPR, whether it's attached or detached. You can't be within 100 feet of a church, school, playground, or park. You have to have the right zoning. And one of those other rules that they slid in there, to my understanding, is you cannot rent out, say, one bedroom in your house. You cannot get a permit to rent out a dadu above a garage. You have to rent out the entire dwelling in order to get your short-term rental, to be eligible to get your short-term rental permit.
Okay, because I thought Davidson County was not issuing short STR permits for the full property anymore.
I think it's the opposite. Go ahead, Alan.
Yeah, I was going to say.
So I misunderstood that. Yeah.
Well, they are still issuing permits, but it all depends on the zoning of the property and how it's zoned and whether or not it's zoned commercial. And so if it's a residentially zoned property, that's a standalone house in Davidson County, they're not issuing those permits anymore unless it's zoned commercial. Now, I have not heard the rule that Mark just brought up about not renting out a room. That might be new news, or a new thing that they just passed. I have heard the different rules on, you can't be within 100 feet of a bar, for a short-term rental. So a lot of short-term rentals are being shut down because they're within 100 feet of a bar or a liquor store, or there's several other things that you can't be within 100 feet of. I've also heard that, HPRs, the restrictions on HPRs have been a lot more strict over the last couple of years. The rules didn't change. They just interpreted the rules differently. And they said in order for an HPR to be rented, you have to own both sides of the HPR. So that really limited people and said, okay, you don't own this full address. You only own half of it. So you can't do a short-term rental here unless you own both of them. I also know that in RM zoning, from my understanding is you can get a permit for RM zoning, which is residential mixed use zoning, up until the end of 2021. So if you have a property that has an RM zoning and you have a short-term rental permit on it, then you're grandfathered in as long as you get that permit before the end of 2021, right? So anybody that has properties like that, go ahead and get a permit. I would also say, get it set up in an LLC that's only owned by you. And when I say that, the smartest thing I've seen people do is they'll take an address, 123 Main Street, and they'll say, all right, I own this 123 Main Street. I'm going to get an LLC that only I own, 123 Main Street. Instead of the Airbnb permit being in Alan Perry's name, it's going to be in 123 Main Street LLC. Then if I want to sell it after 2021 and it's RM zoning, you can still sell the LLC with the property. Scott, in your head, does that mean you can't do that?
I don't think that's correct. I'm sorry.
Why is that? I've heard that it works, but I haven't had any experience with it.
Well, okay, first of all, unless something's changed recently, the general advice has been do not put the ownership of the property in anything other than your name. Because if it's in a corporation name, they will cancel your permit. It's like a couple of years ago, we were doing estate planning, and we were putting our home in a revocable trust. Yeah. And we were going to put my short-term rental in a revocable trust. And I contacted several people, and they said, no, don't do that, because as soon as you put it into a revocable trust or an LLC, Metro will basically pull your permit.
That is true, Scott. You may have been talking to the same planner that I use, because he said the same thing. He said, if you already have a permit, an Airbnb permit, he said a lot of people were getting in trouble because they were taking their permit that's in my name personally, and they were putting it into a trust, putting the property into a trust. Well, then the permit's in my name. So they said, oh, it's changed names, so your permit's out. You don't have a permit anymore.
Yeah, and I don't think, I understand also where you're talking about as far as putting it in the LLC, so that when you sell it, you're selling the business, not the property per se. And my understanding too is that codes sees through that, or the ordinances are written so that even if you're selling a corporation that owns those properties, it invalidates the permit.
So the permit doesn't transfer it, like if you buy an Airbnb property, it doesn't transfer?
No.
Oh.
No.
For everybody out there listening right now,
Yeah.
this is exactly why this environment is so crazy, because there's different interpretations, there's different people, and all of us have probably talked to attorneys who are dealing with this stuff. And I know the answer to that one, Bill, and the answer is the permits do not stay with the property. And I believe, Scott, that the reason that when you transfer that into a trust, it does void the permit, and you would have to redo the permit process, which is getting back with the fire marshal and doing all those things. Because to my knowledge, let's step back a little bit. There are only two types of permits left in Metro. There's an owner occupied permit for your primary residence, and there's a non-owner occupied permit for basically an investor or a property that isn't your primary. And the only way to get those right now is to get the correct zoning, which is a commercial zoning, an MUL or MUN or other type, or until January 1st, 2022, like Alan said, that RM20 or RM zoning still does apply to those. However, a transfer of property from owners or into a trust or into an LLC voids a permit. And I don't think you can have an LLC own a owner occupied permit. I think that one has to be in your own name if it's your primary residence. And again,
That's what I've heard.
that's okay. So
Well, I was wondering if Alan was talking about like upon the first acquisition of the property, buying it in the name of an LLC first versus what Scott's talking about is buying it in your own name and then converting it to a trust or an LLC, thereby voiding the permit. I feel like there might be two different situations. And then again, if it's the first one, relating to if it's owner occupied or non-owner occupied and how you can acquire that either in your own name or as an LLC.
Yeah, that's my understanding. It's a good question because my understanding was that, and I've not had personal experience with this, but from what I understand, I've heard of people saying that they've been successful at putting the property originally in an LLC name and getting a permit. So you have a permit in 123 Main Street LLC. And then when you sell the property, you not only sell the property, you also give the rights to the LLC to the new owner. Then they get that permit that's in that name. That's my understanding that you could do that, but I could be wrong. But that would be the only loophole that would allow you to sell an RM zone property after 2021 and still have a permit, you know? And as opposed to if it's in your personal name, you can't sell your personal name with the property. So you're kind of stuck there. But let's get an attorney to review that and know for sure, because I trust Scott completely, and if he's seen the opposite, then I want to investigate that a little bit more before we say that is absolute truth, because I just don't know.
Yeah. So, and again, going back to what Mark said, do you see what happens here? we've got some of the brightest minds that we've got in the STR world right here on this, and we still are. And here's the thing: this isn't like this in every single city. I think a lot of this is Nashville, right? I mean, and you go to Gatlinburg or something, it's a little bit easier because they fully endorse the STRs at a high level, right? They stayed ahead of that growth. So I think a little bit of this is Nashville, and yet when you get into this world, the more you know and the more you're up to date on everything, you got to protect your investors because that's your fiduciary, right? So in absence of making sure that we stay on kind of the task and everything, if we were looking to invest ourselves, let's go selfish for a minute, right? We talked to clients, we talked vision, we talked everything, and if we really take into consideration if I was investing in something right here, right now, this is actually going to help me get perspective on bringing this to somebody else. And I'm not going to ask y'all necessarily to share your stories. You can share somebody else's stories or whatever. I would love to hear some of the wins, and then I'd love to hear if there have been any losses, right? And when I say that, what purchase price, what kind of return, what's been great about it? Hey, this was horrible. I failed forward on this one and improved. Any insight that you would be willing to give us when it comes to anybody on here thinking, I want to get into this game and make this part of my 401k in the real estate world. Let me start with, let's go Mark first.
Well, I think, telling the story of where Nashville was at, if you go back, let's say a year and a half, and I'm looking for clients for short-term rentals, this market was so hot that there was nothing on the market. There was deals being done off the market, and there was, you may have a client that owned one that's ready to cash in with some equity, but there is nothing out there on the market to buy that was short-term eligible because it was such a hot commodity. The returns, like I said, are real. And so what happened, and it happened to my clients as well, is you start pushing away from the core. You start getting out into some of the fringe neighborhoods, but still paying that price point of, I'm talking, we're on the fringe of Nashville and a few minutes out, and we're paying $800, $850 for short-term rental eligible properties that, you're looking at pro formas and you're looking at numbers on properties that are in the Gulch or in 12 South. And so then you pull the trigger, you get this thing furnished, and you're a little bit farther outside of that bubble, but still paying that same price. but all is peachy, with the numbers, you're doing all right until COVID hits, and now you're really struggling because you're banking on that pro forma of the numbers you looked at from closer to the city. Anyway, that being said, I do think the market has softened a little bit. There has been some trading of these short-term rentals this year, obviously, with less bookings and less income. And I think 2021 is going to be an insanely interesting year because of this definitive timeline, definitive date that Metro has put on these RM20 or RM zone properties, which is January 1st, 2022. I believe that there's going to be a lot of investors who own property who want to cash in on the equity. And I think there's going to be some long-term investors that are seeing this as, I want to get in, get these permits, get grandfathered in before that date. So that's why I think next year is going to be crazy interesting. But so back to your question, sorry, I went on a little tangent there. I have had clients overpay to get into the market and now are seeing a little bit of a lull in returns, and I hope it kicks back up, but that's the risk you take. And I've also seen properties that are 750, 800 closer to the Gulch, 12 South, where a long-term tenant may pay 3,500 a month, and these guys are getting checks for 7,500 or $8,000 a month from the property management company after they take their fees out. So double the long-term number. And so that's what has people so fired up. That's what has these people staring at that cash flow going, this is now a business. It's just not a residence. Now it's a business. And so there's both sides of the coin. But I think you got to be careful on making sure you're qualified and eligible.
Well, I think it's a good point you just made too. An investor will naturally, maybe a newer investor, some of the veterans, right? The big guys, they will really get into the numbers and make sure it's a common sense, logical decision. However, we all have those investors who are just looking to get in for the first time, new to STR, the whole deal. All they see is the flash, right, Mark? So they see that big win. You got to be realistic with them and get them to expect, hey, not every month's going to be here, right? What happens if it's this? Because essentially you could look at buying STR as you're buying a stock. What happens to that business? What are the outside factors that happen there? Alan, what would you add on if somebody's here looking to invest themselves? Like, what do they need to look out for? What kind of considerations do you keep in mind when you're going to Florida and Gatlinburg and all those things?
So, I agree with Mark completely. I think that you have to make sure that the analysis you're looking at or the projections of income are it apples to apples, so that you're not looking at, like he said, looking at Gulch numbers when you're buying in Woodbine, as an example. It's like you don't want to be buying in the fringe, but get numbers from in the heart of the city. And so, just be careful there. I think that you really need to set everybody's expectations the best that you can. People hear these big numbers, buy an $800,000 place and you'll get, $100,000 in rental income. Well, make sure they understand all the numbers involved, because $100,000 in gross revenue can easily, translate into a net of 20,000, And so do you want a net of 20,000? Are you prepared for that? In a bad year, you may end up with less than that. In a bad year, COVID year, you may, not net anything, and so you got to be prepared for those things. I also think that there are certain things that are better to buy than others. In my personal experience, I have had nothing but 2-bedroom units, right? I've had nothing but 2-bedroom older units. These are all places that I already owned in Nashville that were great long-term rentals for me, but they happened to have commercial zonings to them. So I was able to get an Airbnb permit. Well, I found that on average, those were making, $35,000 to $40,000 a year gross revenue, right? But then I would take out utilities, I would take out management fee, I would take out taxes, and it all ended up being closer to a net of $24,000 to $25,000 per unit, and I could rent them out long term for $21,000 So is it worth the hassle of it all, right? And so where I see bigger returns in my experience and from other investors I work with are bigger units, 3, 4, 5, 6 bedroom places where people are willing to pay a premium for that. Instead of getting 4 hotel rooms, they can come with all their friends and have a 5 bedroom place, and they'll pay a lot more money per night for that place. We're seeing the same with places in Gatlinburg, Pigeon Forge. The sweet spot there is not a 1 or 2 bedroom place. It's a 4, 5, or 6 bedroom place with amenities. You know, if you can have amenities there, like a hot tub, a pool table, indoor pool, even those things really get a higher return. And so you've got to know your market and where you are and what gets the better return, what to spend your money on when you're purchasing, and what areas, you know, this works. And so I hope that's helpful. I do have another appointment that I've got to go to in just a minute.
Yeah.
But I
Well,
appreciate you guys. This has been great.
well, I think that's really smart what you just said by doing the 4 and 5 bedroom options in certain areas, right? Again, Alan said you've got to judge that location for that location, right? If you
Yeah.
have a 4 or 5 bedroom, you're actually no longer competing with hotels. Whereas as a 1 or 2 bedroom, technically you are, right? So if you take off some of the competition, you can charge that premium. Before we lose Alan, because he's going to go get another house to add to his collection for the closings this year, does anybody have any questions that aren't in the chat, or that you just want to, you can go on mute and just ask questions. That's the beauty of this mastermind. And we're going to have Mark for another 15 minutes as well.
Yep, I'm good. Go ahead.
Quick question. What about the insurance impact of that? Like if you have this 4 bedroom house and you have people come in and they, you know, do significant damage, or, you know, you end up in a lawsuit from a neighbor to the property in some way. Is there additional liability? What will your home insurance kind of cover on stuff like that? And is that included in that overall factoring of the pro forma?
You have to get different insurance for your property when you start to do short-term rental with it. And so that is an increase in premium, but it, you know, you'd hate to have a claim and not have that insurance. Airbnb requires that you have the insurance, but you've got to make sure that you talk to your insurance person about, you know, what you're doing with your property, because it does increase your rate, but they do cover things. I mean, I've seen them cover things. And so that's a good question though, but you also factor that into your pro forma, and it's still, you know, very doable.
Great question. No, then I see you, Tracy. You thinking all angles, right? My investors are going to ask me this, and I need to know this. That's great.
By the way, I like that pink shirt, Marcus. That's
Thank you.
spot on today.
Thank you, Tracy. I was waiting on Andy to tell me something, but he didn't say nothing. He's been all quiet. He needs his headphones back, Alan. And I'll take a couple questions from the chat. Barbara, what is insurance called? I guess, is there a certain policy name for the insurance, or is it just?
No, it's just a short-term rental coverage for a short-term rental or an overnight rental claim policy. This is just a different kind of policy, and a lot of insurance companies won't do it. So you have to get creative. I know I switched to Farmers Insurance for mine. That was one of the only companies I could find where it was reasonable. You know, some of the insurance was a lot higher than it needed to be, and so I had to call around to get somebody good to do it.
I love that. And then Steve asked, is there any coverage from Airbnb, or are they just a pass-through source?
There is. Yeah, Mark, you're shaking your head.
Yeah, I'll interject a little bit. I believe that to get your permit from the city, you have to show $1 million of extra umbrella insurance policy. So it's part of the requirement for Metro to issue you a permit in the first place. That when you go to get your clients a permit, or I like to have the property manager handle all this stuff just because it can be a pain in the butt, but you need to show proof of extra insurance. Now, as far as Airbnb goes, if I have family or friends staying and I'm going to block off a date for myself or whatever, I still have them book through Airbnb or VRBO, that service, because that's another layer of protection that you get when you go through those platforms. And so I think property manager recommended me do that in the very beginning, and that's another added insurance safety net. But you are required to have an extra $1 million of insurance policy coverage through your insurance when you get your permit.
And I think we can all agree you need to charge a premium for friends and family, right? You definitely, definitely. You don't want them staying there too long.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
And then Lori Cloud, I think, asked one of probably the best questions of the day. All right, Mark, what is the one thing you wished you had known when you started that you had to learn the hard way?
Well, if I had a crystal ball, what I would have said is let's buy about 30 of these, because 5 years ago, it would have been nice. But oh man, that's a very hard question to answer, because personally, ours has been doing well for us. I think the biggest thing is, and this is just from me, is that we used to try to micromanage everything. My wife and I would come in after every stay. We would go through the house and look at, a scrape on the floor or something. If it's big enough, your insurance will cover it and your property management will notify you. But I like to put professionals in place to take care of the booking and cleaning and management of this, because it's very, very time and labor intensive. And then when we decided to take a step back and let them do their job, it became a pure investment for us instead of a headache for us. Because I'm telling you, and this is for yourself personally or your clients, it can be a big headache with these things. I mean, there's a lot of people that come in and they're on vacation and they enjoy themselves in your house, in your property, and you got to kind of just go, all right, we'll clean it up, we'll turn it over, we'll do it again, and this is my investment. Because if you take it too personal, you can get your feelings hurt. But I wish I had a little bit more for you on that one.
Well, what I heard you say, man, and I think you said it very well. What I heard you say was, instead of treating it like a job, treat it like a business. Because like a job, you're going over there and you're micromanaging, you're doing all. If you treat it like a business and you assess the, your scores that you're getting from your management company, the returns, that whole thing, that's how you do it, right? Because the minute, I think it's easy getting an STR for the first time yourself, and then all of a sudden, oh man, I've got to spend so many hours over there and I got to do this and I got to do that. And then all of a sudden you get away and distracted from the things that actually got you there in the first place, AKA selling more houses.
Well, and let me add to this, because I just thought of something as well that Alan was saying, a couple little tidbits on some of the rules. He was saying he usually was doing 2-bedroom units, and a lot of what people are building now are 3 and 4 bedrooms. Why is that? It's because, and I don't know if this is just I think this is just a metro thing. So let's just go as a Nashville only. The number of guests you're allowed to market to is restricted by how many bedrooms you have in the house that's on the tax record. And the max you can have is 4. And so the way they do that is it's the amount of bedrooms times 2 plus 4. And so the biggest listings you'll see in Nashville are 12-person listings. And to give you an idea, I had about 2.5 years of income, of consistent income as a 3-bedroom in my unit. Well, we sat down with my property manager, we went over the numbers, and it was that significant of a difference to convert the garage into a 4th bedroom and put a closet in there, put the window in there. And now I could go from marketing from 10 people, 3 times 2 plus 4, to 12 people. And it made that much of a difference in my returns. And so when you're looking and when you're advising clients, you'll see that 4 bedrooms is the way to go. It doesn't really behoove you to get 7, because you can only market to 12 anyway. And you got to be careful. Here's another little tidbit I almost got snake bit on. A city like Berry Hill, even if it's a 4-bedroom, only allows you, they'll give you your short-term rental permit, but you can only market to 8 people. And if you market to more, they'll pull your permit. And therefore, You can only market to 8 people. You get filtered out in the searches on Airbnb and VRBO and those things, and you get less return, less bookings and all that stuff. It all makes a difference. It all adds up when you're looking at these properties.
And is this something that a good management company will already know the rules to in those areas, or is this something that you researched, found out on yourself, and then helped with the management company know what to do?
I would say that the management company is a huge resource in this. It's massively important compared to a long-term tenant, just because of the intense time commitment it takes, and then all that. The Berry Hill one, I had to find out on my own after I was already under contract for a client. I'm thankful. I can't remember who let us out of the deal, but we found that out. I said, this deal is too good to be true. And Berry Hill, they were so nice. They said, yeah, we'll give you a permit, no problem, but you can only market to 8, and we are very strict on it. And he was, couldn't have been a nicer Southern gentleman, but he was like, oh yeah, we'll pull your permit and fine you and give you a 12-month discipline. So Berry Hill, be careful of the zoning, and be careful of the location, because it all makes a difference.
Well, and I think it's also, if you are representing a client and you're purchasing something for an STR, and Scott, maybe you can help me out with a little bit of the verbiage here, but I don't think there's anything wrong with putting in the offer letter, hey, during our due diligence period, if we find anything that won't allow us to do what we're looking to do with the property, we have full rights to back out, no penalties, blah, blah, blah. And just have that due diligence period, the 45 days that you need to, and attack all that information. That way you protect yourself and your client, right? So, okay, cool. And then Barbara asked, what does lease killers charge?
So they are, depending on the property, either 15% or 20%. And I'll let you guys know on my numbers, this is pre-COVID. This is not 2020. So 17, 18, and 19, 100. I estimated that my gross revenue that my property brought in, my return was about 68%. So if I made 100 grand, I got 68,000 as, this is before debt service. This is before my bills, but that's the 15%. And then the city takes their taxes, and then there's a hotel fee, and then there's service fees for cleaning and all that stuff, which you pay for when you'll charge a $200 a night plus 120 in cleaning, but it's all goes to that gross number. And I estimated we were, for a 36-month period, we were around 67 to 69% was my net return before debt service, before bills and all that stuff, just to give you guys an idea of what we were looking at.
Which is, and if you had to estimate the percentage out of the 60, let's call it 67%, after you took out your fees, what was the true net percentage? And you can shoot from
Say that one more time. Sorry, Marcus.
Yeah, so you've got the 67% after the management company and some of the things. What was your net at the end of the day after what? And I'm not talking amounts, I'm talking percentage.
Yeah. Well, and here's the thing is, so this is where you can get tripped up. A property manager could tell you that this thing's bringing in 10 grand a month, and you're going, okay, that's 120,000. That's insane. So what are you expecting? You're expecting a 10,000 a month check. And then all of a sudden he gives you a 4,000 a month check or whatever. You just do the numbers, whatever they are. And you're like, wait a second, you said 10. Well, that's why you got to be careful. People are tongue twisting their numbers out there. God bless them. Everyone's trying to sell, and I get it, but people are putting crazy numbers on these things. So I always talk about the number that I get as if I'm talking about a long-term tenant per month. And then I was above my 1%. So I think I was, my net, it was, there's a ton of ways to look at it, but my debt service was, and all in, I was probably making 20% on my gross number.
That's awesome. That's
yeah,
really
it was going well for a long time.
That's great. And guys, if for some reason that doesn't sound good to you, change your mindset a little bit, because that's great. And because that's true net income. That's after paying the mortgage. That's also paying for an asset that's also growing. You see where I'm going with this? So this is really, really great. Okay, and then
I do see a question in the comments, and I would like to talk about this, and I encourage everyone to do their research. I can find a way to tag some of these ordinances for you guys, but in 2016, well, actually, I should say, when I got into the game in 2016, the rules were what they were. From that point on, they've been trying to get new things in place to limit these things, pull them, take them away, not give you eligibility, because they didn't get out in front of this thing. And so some of the rule changes that I've seen: HPR, you cannot get a short-term rental permit for one side of an HPR. If you do own both sides of an HPR, you only get one short-term rental permit, and you must live in the other side. You can't claim any income from the other side. That's important to remember. This is, again, everyone can fact check me on this. This is why it's an ever-changing environment. But another rule they put in is the 100-foot rule. And this is lot line to lot line. This is last summer. You cannot get a short-term rental permit if you're within 100 feet of a park, school, church, or playground. Another just kind of arbitrary rule that they're trying to cut back eligibility on these things. And that doesn't matter. That the zoning does not matter on that. It can be zoned anything. You can't be lot line to lot line 100 feet away from those things. Another rule is this.
Commercial.
What's that?
That's including commercial zones.
So that I would have to double check. I know it includes the RM zonings. I do not know if it includes the MULs or the DTCs or the commercial, but I know the RM is included in that even through the end of next year. And during that ordinance, I believe that they put in the dwelling rule. You cannot rent out one. What developers were building was like a kind of a suite on the first floor, where that had a separate entrance where you could rent out one room and live upstairs or whatever. That includes dadoos, that includes apartments, whatever. I do not believe you can get a permit to rent out just one room. You have to rent out the whole dwelling now. And that's my understanding. And that is another thing they just tucked into this ordinance last summer with the 100-foot rule, and changed on people. And, obviously people that are grandfathered in are good, but they're just trying to pull this back as much as they can. We've already talked at length about the new zoning changes.
Well, I'll ask this question, and y'all tell me, and Mark, you can tell me what you think, bud. Do you think that it would be beneficial? I'm sure that there's somebody down there at Codes or the city or maybe somewhere that we could get on a call like this and say, hey, pour into our market center and give us the newest and best. And if it's a Codes guy, I know that anybody down there I can convince to come over here with lunch. So
yeah,
that would show some value.
Totally. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that'd be great. I think all of these things have been kind of twisted and interpreted their own way. And there's a lot of what's going on between me and Alan and Scott today on what we believe to be the truth. And, I had a client that was just a couple days away from closing that we got caught in the HPR thing, and we got in trouble on that because it was interpreted differently. And so I think doing all your research on these things is important, and not just believe in what you hear from me.
Well, and that being said, we got one more big year, right? And some investors are going to be selling, some investors are going to be playing the long play, like the whole deal, before we have strict rules on this next 2022 venture. So let's make it a big year. We'll put in action getting somebody in here. If you guys don't mind, it's been an hour. I want to respect everybody's time. Again, Mark, thank you. Drop some comments thanking Mark for his time and appreciation for him coming and showing up for us today. And obviously, Mark, if you don't mind, buddy, throw your cell phone in there, because I know there's some people here that maybe on their first STR venture, they may want some guidance, some help, or maybe even like a co-representation type thing, depending on the client. So that way they can reach out to you and rock and roll. Any other final statements, anything that anybody wants to make?
Hey, Marcus, if I could throw in a couple things. Keeping up with everything is really tough. it's constantly changing. And a couple of recommendations I have. One is NASTRA, Nashville Area Short-Term Rental Association. Become a member of that. And that way you're privy to, NASTRA has their own attorney or counsel who is constantly looking at the regulations that are coming up. So helping interpret them for NASTRA members. And you can find them on the web, obviously, or Facebook. You won't get all of their full information unless you become a member. They're also a lobbying organization too. So NASTRA, Nashville Area Short-Term Rentals Association. Another recommendation is consider becoming part of the legislative committee at Greater Nashville Realtors. I chaired that committee this last year, and probably 50% of what we cover are short-term rentals, the changes that are taking place there. And it's a really good place to just be informed in general, whether it's sidewalk ordinance or referendum to recall Mayor Cooper. It's kind of a wide gamut, but most of the people that are on that committee, like Grant Hammond or Darren Cunningham, are very involved in short-term rentals. And so that's a great place to participate. You can still sign up through Greater Nashville Realtors to be a member of that committee. And then also keep an eye on classes that the Greater Nashville Realtors has. Usually once a year, they have something called 7 Secrets. It's a free class on Thursday mornings on the first Thursday of the month. And many, many times we've had people from codes be on a panel to help kind of navigate whatever the short-term rental regulations were at that time. So those are a couple of things I'd recommend.
And Scott, what was that committee one more time? Was it Nashville Area Short-Term Rental?
Okay, there's 2 things. Nashville Area Short-Term Rentals Association is an organization for short-term rental owners and operators. And then the Greater Nashville Realtors, most of us are members of Greater Nashville Realtors, the legislative committee, one of the committees that our organization has. Meets once a month. Right now it's meeting on Zoom, obviously, which works really well. It's very convenient. So.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Mark, from everybody here, you got a lot of love in the comments. Scott as well, jumping in here. He wasn't even prompted to be on this panel. Here he comes. I love it. So Scott, thank you for jumping in. Mark, thank you, brother, for your time. Everybody have a wonderful day, and we'll see you soon.
Take care, guys.